So let us begin. Again, welcome to the Small Business Policy Expo 2019. I'm Ramon Ray, your host for today, and I am deliriously, massively excited to be here. And I'll be done in about 1 or 2 minutes, and we'll get the show on the road. A few things to share with you as we start and as people start to come in. It's been a pleasure. I'm from the country of New Jersey, and I rarely come to D.C. Been here a few times, and it's an honor to be here. So many people, Karen, just who want to support small business, and that's awesome to see. So really, thank you all for being here. A big thanks. Can we give a round of applause? I don't know how y'all do it in D.C., so I have to get a little familiar. A nice round of applause to the Small Business and Economic Council for hosting this event and putting it together, Karen, and she'll speak in a bit. So I think they've done a great job. And a big thanks to the partners who are part of this as well. And I'm sure our moderators and others can thank them as we go forward. But definitely thanks to our partners, U.S. Black Chambers, National Association for Self-Employed, Association of Women Business Centers, and so many others. I guess I started, Karen. I should thank everybody since I started, right? U.S. Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Coalition for Affordable Health Coverage, and many, many others that I've met and seen today. So thank you all for being a part of the event today. So listen, from the perspective that I see it sometimes, it seems, how many feel sometimes that small business are under assault? Anybody feel that way? How many feel that sometimes it's hard to start a business? Anybody feel that? Oh, yeah. That it's challenging? Okay, yeah, it's challenging. But I think what's nice about being in this room, that no matter who we are, what perspectives we have, everybody in this room is here to support small business. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And that is a beautiful thing to see. If I was in New York, people would clap on that statement. That's okay, though. So it's just great to be here. I think it's kind of like an oasis. And I think for me, what I hope to get from the panels as we begin is really, I think, what can the government do for smaller businesses? I think it's a valid question. What can our government do for us? But I think it's also important to learn, how can smaller businesses, how can entrepreneurs, how can we help and give back and support and be a part of the conversation with our government and policymakers? That make sense? Great. The hashtag for this event, some of you are not tweeters, can't even spell the word. That's okay. Those of you who can, hashtag is Small Biz Policy Expo. We encourage you to take a lot of photos. My good side is on this side, so please use that, and each panelist can say their good side as we go along. But let's get the show on the road, and our first panel today is the Small Business Agenda 2019 Consensus for Action. Our panelists are Talisha Bekavac, Vice President of Government and External Affairs, U.S. Black Chambers. Thank you so much for being here, Talisha. Thank you so much. Keith Hall, President and CEO of National Association for the Self-Employed. Keith is there. Corinne Hodges, CEO, Association of Women's Business Centers. Thanks for being here, Corinne. Kerrigan, of course, is there. And Karen is the President and CEO, Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council. Karen, thank you for being here. And Todd McCracken, President, National Small Business Association, NSBA. Todd, I'm going to turn this over to you. And one more time, can we just welcome our first panel of the day? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really exciting to be here. And to kick things off, we're going to talk about sort of prospects for 2019. Can we get some bipartisan consensus on some issues? I spend a lot of time around the country and in this city talking to small business owners, talking to legislators, listening to what people are saying about small business. And we hear again and again, no matter a politician or regulator's partisan stripe, they want to help small businesses. So it stands to reason that we should be able to find some points of consensus and agreement and some real action on some things we can do to forward the cause of small business startup and job creation. So I think we're going to start off this panel by giving each of us a chance to kind of talk about where we see those opportunities in the coming year or even two. And then we'll have some conversation about it and take some questions from you all. So probably makes sense to start with our host, who's immediately to my left, Kerrigan. What do you think is going to happen? Or what should happen?
What should happen? What do we want to happen, right? I mean, I think that's the question. Well, you know, I always tend to start out new Congresses, and actually every year on a very optimistic note, because we do work with a range of different members across the aisle, and we are able to connect the dots. I mean, we do see a lot of possibilities and opportunities. And you know, where the last Congress ended, there were some lost opportunities there. I mean, one of the big issues where we have generally seen bipartisan consensus is on the access to capital and capital formation issues. So that's a really big issue, and one where there is bipartisan support. And you know, unfortunately, in the last Congress, The Senate did not pass the massively bipartisan Jobs Act 3.0, which was the Jumpstart Our Business Startup Act 3.0, which included about 30 bills, maybe a dozen or so, supported by my organization and I think other small business groups as well, that would done a range of things to make the capital markets more competitive, lift costs on small businesses, modernize SEC rules, a range of different things. And we've been working individually on many of those bills across Congresses, and they've passed the House on a either by voice vote or, again, massively bipartisan basis. And it was really great to see Maxine Waters and Jeb Hensarling, then the chairman and ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, come together, put that massive bill together, and it passed the House 406-4. I mean, that was just tremendous. So, there we see another big opportunity, I think, in the current Congress.
You ought to have a rule. When Jeb Hensarling and Maxine Waters agree on something, it should be law automatically.
Right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it should be. It should be like the fast track through the Senate, and, there's no questions asked. So, there was the opportunity maybe in the year-end package, to have it put in there, but we all know what happened at year-end, right? So anyway, we're already working on both sides of the aisle. A lot of the new members of the Financial Services Committee, some of the people had formally introduced bills to get that whole thing going. We're basically unbundling Jobs Act 3.0 and, trying again to get it passed, and maybe there'll be an opportunity to bundle all this together. But so that I think is a big opportunity. And also I will mention that some of those bills on the House side also were introduced individually on the Senate side. So we testified both for the Financial Services Committee and over on the Senate side as well. The other big area, and there's a lot, but I'll just sort of toss it to the next person. I mean, is healthcare and healthcare reform. Now, you may not think that, given there's the talk for Medicare for all, and everyone's sort of, how are you going to pay for this? But there are some targeted health insurance or health cost relief measures that we're supporting that have big bipartisan support. And the big issue is the health insurance tax, the HIT tax. And big bipartisan support in the previous Congress for placing a moratorium on the health insurance tax, which essentially hits the self-employed, small businesses, seniors as well, people just starting businesses. I mean, it's a pretty big tax. It amounts to, I got the note here in terms of billing, $16 billion a year. So we're talking $50 million a day of taxes on health insurance plans that small business owners are paying for. And the good news is, again, there's been bipartisan support for repealing or extending that moratorium. And over on the Senate side, there was a bill S80 introduced by now Senator Sinema and also Barrasso to repeal the tax. And then right after that, 6 senators, bipartisan basis, introduced a bill to extend the current moratorium in 2019 2 more years. And but we've got to get that done now. I mean, it's so vital that moratorium, that extension happen right now in order to have real relief for small business owners, because, the insurance companies are going to start putting together their rates, and they're going to start going out, midsummer. Small businesses are going to see those. There's going to be the shock, they got a plan. So we're trying to get that through immediately. And, there's other areas, I'll send it down during our discussion, but certainly, broadband access. We're hoping there'll be some, bipartisan support, on trade and opening up global markets. But really, the 2 big issues that I think that where, again, that we've been access to capital and this whole healthcare issue and just removing and relieving costs from small business owners. And as you know, Todd, members of the Small Business Roundtable, we did a post-election survey, and healthcare costs, that was still the #1 issue. I think the question was, if there was one issue that Congress could address, what would it be? And it was healthcare cost. Yep. And again, the HIT is something that would have an immediate impact if Congress acted right away.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. That's a really good way to start us off. Corinne, you're the new CEO of the Association of Women Business Centers, which has a really unique perspective on these things. What opportunities do you see?
So 3 weeks on the job so far, and have been reaching out to our members, the women business centers who are across the country who benefit from the SBA grants to help really fund their operations so they can serve women clients who are either starting new businesses or expanding an existing business. And you may not know that the average length of, or I should say age of a business firm is 7 years that our women businesses serve. And we've made some progress. Even if you just look in the last year, we've increased the number of women-owned firms from, we're at 40% basically of all firms are now women-owned firms. But the problem is we need to be more, and we also need to have better, as you mentioned, access to capital. So only 14% of women, or I should say of loans that are approved, are those women-owned businesses. Yet they're approaching that 40% mark of total number of firms. So there's a gap. And the way that we see being able to address that is through the Women Business Center network. So what we're focused on this year is reauthorization of the WBC program. And that's what we're focused on. It's been about 10 years since that program has been authorized. So it's certainly time, and it's time to take a look at it afresh, anew with this new Congress. And we've got, I think, some wonderful support for it, both in the House and the Senate small business committees. And so we're working on getting to know them and working on what those priorities could look like. For us, that's priority number one.
Okay. Thank you. Well, Talisha, U.S. Black Chambers has been really rapidly growing, I think, for some of these issues for the last few years.
Yes.
So what's your perspective on these? What can we do?
We are rapidly growing. We're probably the baby on the panel here. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. And funny, when we started, we only had 6 chambers back in 2009. And as of today, we have 150 chambers across the country in 30 states, and we represent over 300,000 members. We also have MOUs in China and in Durban, South Africa. So rapidly growing. And some of the issues for our members, just like my colleagues here on the panel, are always going to be access to capital. But if you ask a black firm what their number 1, 2, and 3 concerns are, it's going to be access to capital. And our president and CEO, Ron Busby, has done a great job working with black-owned banks such as Industrial Bank here locally in D.C., as well as Liberty Bank to promote Bank Black programs. And we have credit card where our members can go in with a credit score as low as 580 and actually get a line of credit. And that's important for us. And we've been monitoring HR 41, the Rescue Act that Congressman Bobby Rush has come out in the state of Illinois that expands the use of black banks. We feel like that would be a great policy to help solve the issue of access to capital in our community. So we'd love to see some bipartisan support on that. Another thing that we have been monitoring that's just kind of crept up, there was a report that came out. The Section 809 panel has recommended that Congress roll back small business set-asides because it incentivizes businesses to stay small. And we don't necessarily agree with that, and we hope that that doesn't gain any steam because, in our opinion, federal contracting for a lot of black-owned firms is their first entree into growth and development. And those first few contracts gives them an opportunity to compete at a national and global scale. So we hope to not see the Section 809 report sway Congress in any way on small business set-asides. We'd like to see those stay in place. Another thing that we see is important this year is, of course, the simplification of tax. Small business owner doesn't really have the overhead to have a team of accountants reviewing their books on a monthly basis, and so we think it's important that the bipartisan bill that's come out with Representative Chabot and Velasquez will gain some steam, and we'll see some votes positively on that. What else? The 8A program. We'd love to see the 8A program be supported and to remain intact. In addition to the MBDA, the Minority Business Development Agency, it's the only agency that provides support for minority businesses. And we worked really hard in 2016 to keep that agency. It was on a list of cuts for the new administration, but we advocated very heavily with support from some of our colleagues here, and we were able to maintain that. and we'd like to see the MBDA continue to be a resource for our members going forward. So that's us. Those are some of our issues, and I'll pass it back to you, Todd.
Great. Well, those are really, all really good points. Our final panelist, Keith Hall, represents the National Association for the Self-Employed. Which, of course, is a really important part of the small business community, shares many of the concerns of other small companies, but has unique concerns of their own. So, Keith, what's your wish list for this year?
The good thing about going last is I don't have to think of anything new. The bad part about going last, I don't have anything new. I think the things that we have an opportunity to accomplish in 2019 are also the things that I think we want to accomplish in 2019, which I think is awesome. As a couple of people have mentioned, I think we do have opportunities to make a difference in healthcare. Since 2010, when the ACA was being debated and argued and arm wrestled, there were always three components to that everyone talked about, and that was access to healthcare, the quality of that healthcare, and the affordability of that healthcare. Those are always kind of the three things that we talked about. It seems like today we talk more about the affordability part than the other parts. I don't want us to ever forget about those other two parts, but I think we do have an opportunity to make a difference in this calendar year as it relates to affordability. I think there's a number of options through association group health plans that can provide more options to self-employed and small business people, which could, hopefully, has a chance to reduce cost and put some controls there. I think we have some opportunities to expand health reimbursement arrangements, which gives the smaller of small businesses a chance to help their employees. They may not be able to afford a full family plan, but maybe they can contribute a couple of $1,000s to each employee. An HRA can help them do that. So expanding the availability of those, I think, is important. And I think those are things that both sides of the aisle want to see happen. And so that gives me some optimism that those things can be accomplished. Talisha mentioned tax simplification. I'm a CPA. I do a number of tax returns, not that many anymore because I'm not smart enough anymore. CPA stands for couldn't pass again, if anybody wondered what that actually stands for. But I think one of the goals for the Tax Reform Act that was passed this last year, that CPAs are just now starting to do those tax returns this year, was for the tax code to be simplified. I don't think we really accomplished that. We kind of missed the mark on simplification. The bill that Talisha mentioned that the Chair Velasquez and Ranking Member Chabot came up with, I think is a great first step, makes a number of things easier to deal with. If nothing else, just putting the estimated tax payments in line with a normal quarterly person's managing their cash flow. That's just like I don't know why that has ever been the way that it is now, but little things like that make a difference. Most of you probably don't remember or care to remember that one of the cornerstones of the Tax Simplification Act that we just passed was increasing the standard deduction for individuals. Most people know what a standard deduction is. Basically, it means you can pick this normal amount, or you can go through all the detail, and if yours adds up to be more, then you can choose the higher number. I would love for Congress to consider expanding that concept to the self-employed's tax return. You can actually go through the thought process of saying, if you're a cabinet maker in Des Moines, Iowa, and you have $100,000 of revenue, you can add up all your entertainment bills, all your gas miles, all your equipment expenses, all your training and education, you can add all those things up and take the deduction that you normally do, or click a box and your deduction is $21,000. Now think how much time that could improve the availability of time for small business owners. And in my heart, the number one asset that every small business owner has, maybe their only true asset, is their time. And if we can take even 1 week, think about this, 1 week of their time off of worrying about their tax return, 1 week translates into 2% of their entire year. If we could increase our gross national product by 2 percentage points, I'll let the economists in the room figure out how much that could be. But I think tax simplification, improving options for access and affordability for healthcare, I think those are the two things that we really and truly have an opportunity to see inroads in 2019.
Great, that's terrific. Let me ask about a couple of things that I didn't hear about see if anybody has any reaction to them, and then we can talk about sort of plumb a little bit deeper into things you did mention. One is everyone said healthcare costs, not everyone, but most people said healthcare costs are a huge small business priority, and clearly they are. But the other thing you hear increasingly from small businesses when you're out and about is the hard time they find keeping training their workforce these days. This economy is going gangbusters, and they just can't find the qualified workers that they need. Are there opportunities this year to improve that situation for small companies, do you think? And if so, how? Any thoughts?
Well, it needs to be, I mean, it's a big issue, obviously. You know, and you could see it in the numbers, right? With 7 million job openings.
Right.
And I just heard another ADP number today that businesses created another 230,000 jobs in January. It's
Yep.
like, well, who are going to fill these, right? I mean, so it is really, I mean, for our members, you know, again, one of the top concerns is finding and keeping qualified employees. I think, you know, it's not, I don't think there's one, you know, silver bullet,
Right.
you know, to resolve the issue. I mean, certainly immigration reform, you know, is a critical issue that plays into that. The administration, you know, has started the conversation and, you know, has gotten a lot of the industry on board, you know, the apprenticeships programs and things like that. You know, I think there's a lot of, I mean, that is definitely an issue that calls out for, you know, bipartisan innovative solutions, right? Whether they come from, you know, from the House and the Senate and members of Congress, or whether they come from the private sector. I mean, really, it is a critical issue. I think, you know, the criminal justice reform bill that just, you know, passed, we know there's a, you know, there will be people
Yep.
that will be, we had members actually that were working with the prisons and the jails and you know, working with them, and when people were leaving, you know, onboarding them, you know, into the workforce. So that really is taking that sort of, you know, that small example that some of our members are doing, you know, to a national level. So I think, you know, there's a lot of different things, you know, that need to be done, but it is a critical issue.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, thoughts? Keith?
I think one of the things that I like to think about this in a unique way. I think a unique way. It's like having difficulty finding new workers is like the cloud to the silver lining of low unemployment. I mean, we have great economic numbers. If you look at employment, you know, we're at, you know, depending on who you listen to, all-time lows in all categories, which is great. But then what that means is it may be difficult to find qualified people for the positions you have open. And the thing I'm most proud of the group of people that I think we all support, and that is small business, is I view kind of small businesses like water. Whenever there's a hole, water will rush and fill that hole. And when you see the number of openings that we have and the difficulty that we find in getting an adequate talent, trained talent, I see a dramatic opportunity for small businesses to fill that training void. And I see in the next couple of years, there's going to be this plethora of new online training opportunities, technology to provide remote access so that employees can fill some of those jobs that are available. Now, hammering nails, you know, fixing the plumbing, those things it's going to be difficult to fill those positions with a remote job, of course, because somebody has to be there. But I just see this tremendous opportunity for small businesses out there to provide technology, to provide training, to take that available workforce, train them so that they can fill the positions that are out there. I just see that as a huge opportunity.
Right. And we know that different states and localities, I mean, they're doing a lot on the education front as well, which is really another big piece of this. And I, you know, really have to rethink, I mean, from an education perspective, what we're doing, and, you know, and are there rules and regulations or systems that are getting in the way, perhaps, of this type of innovation, or for entrepreneurs to, you know, sort of come up with the solutions that are going to, you know, train our young people to actually have the skills, you know, to get into these jobs that are opening that happen to pay very well.
Yeah.
So, and then I think there is, you know, sort of a little bit of a cultural shift that needs to occur too, in terms of the value, right, of all work. And you know, there's been a lot of talk now of, you know, people looking at, well, gee, is it really worth it taking on this debt to go to college when I could, you know, continue to, you know, get educated in another way, but take a full-time job, and have a really, really great, you know, a great salary,
Right.
without incurring any of the debt. So, I think there's a lot happening underneath right now to address this, but certainly it continues to be, a big, and I think our second panel will also be addressing this issue as well, because you got them, you've got the franchisers and,
Right.
others who, developers and contractors. I
Right.
mean, this is sort of
Yep.
huge issue.
Well, we're supposed to be talking about, areas for bipartisan collaboration. That's one of the things we wanted to talk about anyway. And when at the beginning of this administration, the conventional wisdom was that infrastructure was the area where there was most likely to see some bipartisan collaboration. Well, we didn't. But there are also real opportunities for small companies in an infrastructure bill. They need infrastructure, and also there's a lot of stuff that could happen for small companies. Do any of you see any hope for an infrastructure bill this year? And if so, are there particular areas that we need to look out for to protect the interests of small companies?
I didn't hear you, Todd.
The whole infrastructure piece is, what the outlook for opportunities.
Okay.
Look, I think, from my perspective, the administration wants to get something done. The Congress, again, it's a bipartisan issue. They want to get something done. And clearly there's a need, to modernize our infrastructure. It is hurting our competitiveness. It's costing small businesses, having, bad roads. And obviously it comes down to the big issues, how are we going to pay for this? So I think, but again, I think the people who are really, the Congress and the White House want to get this done. Hopefully they'll get some of these other things, past these other things in terms of funding government so they can focus on these types of issues. But it's huge opportunities for, entrepreneurs to be players in terms of infrastructure modernization and the innovation that they bring. But it's also very important for small businesses as users of,
Right.
Roads and bridges, to actually, have modern infrastructure. So, again, it's always like how you're going to pay for something. I think that's always the big sort of hang up, or the big problem in DC. But, I always hold out hope that something can happen.
And I think that's why it's so important when we look at something like an infrastructure bill that has the ability to really, shift the trajectory of a small business if you were to win one of those contracts. And I think it's why it's so important to really look at the protection of the 8A program and the protection of set-asides for small businesses when you have these infrastructure, well, if we have an infrastructure bill that has bipartisan support that gets passed, can we ensure that there are protections and set-asides for small business so that there's an equal piece of the pie to go around?
Well, how can small companies help, lead this horse to water, as it were? I mean, if you look at the national poll, you listen to our leaders, they all want to help small companies. If you look at national polls of the country, small businesses are like the most popular part of our society. If you ask people who do they respect, who do they trust, they respect and trust small business owners. So can small businesses help forge some kind of a bipartisan movement on some of these issues that ought to be bipartisan and get some help? How can we do that best from a big picture perspective?
Well, it takes an engagement, from the small business community, and we've seen, some of our big successes have all been because the right constituencies or grassroots were engaged on this issue. I think, I think we need to support these people. For example, the tax simplification, the Small Business Tax Simplification Act, or Small Business Owner Tax Simplification Act. You've got Nydia Velazquez and Chaput who are behind that bill. The small business community really has got to, sort of up its game in terms of being the voice on that issue and really sort of leading, on that through, the House and hopefully through the Senate in order to get that to the president's desk. But, we've got to support them, and we've got to get co-sponsors for them, and we've got to continue to push it. And it's not just, it's not only our business groups, it's also our members, and they have to get engaged and to do that. So, the Small Business Tax Simplification Act is one bill. There's other bills on regulatory reform. We see other emerging issues too, Todd. For example, the big talk on privacy legislation, one set of rules for everyone, because now you have California passed this big privacy rule that's going to be implemented, I think, in 2020. 26 states now are moving on privacy regulation. I think the small business community is actually ahead on that issue because we're saying, look at, we need one set of privacy rules for everyone because you have a 50-state regulatory framework. And data doesn't stop at the borders and then gets regulated. I mean, but it would be absolutely a nightmare, for small businesses. And so I think the Congress is sort of hearing that on both sides of the aisle that, this is sort of a regulation that is really appropriate to have one set of federal rules as opposed to having 50 states doing something totally different. But anyway, again, it's our voice and sort of, but we got a lot of new members also to get to know as well. And that's part of the challenge too.
Well, and I think to follow that, I totally agree. And I think there's two specific things that we can do today, like right now. One of those is for small business associations like those before you to join forces, to create entities like the Small Business Roundtable, put our voices together so that they're louder. And I think we together have started that process. I think there was a day, hopefully a lot of years ago, that some of the organizations up here saw each other as competitors. But the fact is, we're not competitors. We all are supporting small business with the same voice. And if we're saying the same things together, it makes that voice louder. So I would encourage you to continue to come to events like this, support groups like these, because that's part of the voice. And maybe more importantly than that, the second piece, in my heart of hearts, there are, tell me if I get these numbers wrong because I couldn't pass the class again, but we have 435 congressional representatives. We have 100 senators. We have 9 members of the Supreme Court. We have a president and we have a vice president. Now, all of those people have vastly different views on almost every single issue. But there's 3 things that all those people have in common. One, they want the best for our country. I believe in my heart every one of those people want the best for our country. I also believe that every one of those people want the best for us as Americans. I believe that in my heart. And third, every single one of those believe that the most powerful economic force in this country is small business. Every one of them believe that. We small business owners are more powerful today than we have ever been. But we only have one weapon, and that's our voice. So that second, I would encourage all of you, and everyone that you know, encourage them, contact your congressional representative, contact your 2 senators, and tell them what's important to you. Tell them about health care, about HRAs or access or affordability. Tell them about tax simplification. Tell them about access to capital. What is keeping you from creating one more job? It sounds like a silly thing to do, but it takes you 6 minutes to go to any of our websites, have a place for you to go, click your zip code. It'll tell you who your congressional representatives are. We'll give you a little email template and tell them what matters to you. Whether you're left-leaning, right-leaning, whether you're right down the middle, doesn't matter. Let them know, because our voice is the only weapon that we have.
And just like Keith said, I think it's important to organize. And our national conference this year, the whole theme is going to be about the intersection of policy and business. And it's August 18th to the 22nd, just in case anybody want to mark their calendars, because it's so important for small business owners to stay in the know on what's going on here on the Hill. We inside the Beltway sometimes take for granted that other folks are paying as much attention to policies as we are. And so the onus is on us as associations, as nonprofits, as informed citizens to ensure that we're passing the message on to our small business owners. As Keith mentioned, time is their most valuable resource, and they just don't have the time to stay as engaged as we do here in the Beltway, and we as leaders of these associations. And so our theme will be policy and business, and we're really training a group of capable business owners to go back to their cities and their states and advocate at a state and local level. There's a really big focus for us here at the U.S. Black Chamber on educating our members on how to be grass tops advocates in their communities so that we can, collectively organize and help get things done.
Well, on a lot of these issues too, you can take 2 different approaches, right? healthcare and tax simplification are good examples where you can either go for the whole enchilada and reform the whole system at once, and we've seen that happen in both cases before, or you can chip away at your problems individually. And it does seem like there may be some opportunities this year, as the panel described, to chip away at problems in both of those areas individually. So I wonder if you could highlight just a little bit more sharply sort of the opportunities to bring down healthcare costs in a way that, isn't necessarily Medicare for all or whatever your grand vision is, but can really bring down prices in a meaningful way for small companies.
Well, I think on healthcare, and Brian Blace from the White House, he's going to be here at 3 o'clock, I believe, where he's going to be talking about some of the administration's initiatives on AHPs and health reimbursement accounts and things like that. But for me, it's like if you want to have an immediate impact, the health insurance tax is huge. I mean, it's, you're talking $50 million a day in taxes that are imposed on the health insurance, as taxes on the insurance policies of small business owners and the self-employed. So, and there's bipartisan support for that. There's been bills in the House and the Senate, and just now, again, you've got the bills popped in the last couple of weeks on the Senate side, which is a really good thing. But those bills have to pass right away in order to have an impact again on the costs in 2020 and 2021. So for me, S80 and S172, I mean, they're all over our website, sbecouncil.org. We've got letters up to the Senate. We're trying to get things going on the House side. It's actually good to see the Senate sort of moving first, because usually it's the Senate where things get lost. I mean, the Jobs Act 3.0, this massive bill, and I think in the House they passed close to 8 to 10 small business bills already that came out of the House Small Business Committee that were passed by voice vote. And we don't want them to sort of get lost in the cracks over on the Senate side. But those are specifically right now, right away, from my perspective, those bills need to pass. Yeah, well, S172 I think has the best shot, which is delaying the tax for another 2 years.
And Keith, what about the self-employment tax on health insurance? Do you think there's any opportunity to sort of bring some more attention to that inequity?
I think absolutely yes. I think from a technical standpoint, nobody fall asleep and fall off your chairs when we're talking about detailed taxes. But right now, a vast majority of people in this country are employees. Over 70% of the people work for someone else. A lot of those companies are small business owners just like us, because we have employees as well. But most of those people pay for their health insurance on a pre-tax basis. Even if the company doesn't fund their health care for them, they have some type of ability for the employee to pay for that tax before they get their paycheck. So they don't pay federal income tax on it, nor do they pay FICA or Medicare tax. The self-employed business owner gets a deduction for their health insurance for federal income tax, but still has to pay FICA and Medicare on their health insurance premiums. Now, to make that more simple, the guy living next door to you is an employee. You're self-employed. You have exactly the same health insurance policy, costs exactly the same amount of money, covers exactly the same things. Your health policy costs you 15% more just because it's not deductible for FICA and Medicare. That alone is an inequity in the tax code that should have been fixed years ago. And that's part of this bill, the small business tax bill that Representative Velasquez and Chabot have put forward. Should have been done when I was a kid, but is not. That's one of the things that I believe has a real chance to happen. And again, you guys can tell I'm 33 years old, right? Yeah, I'm 33 years old, and this has been a topic before every congressional session that I can remember. And I think we now have this opportunity, a small part of which is not, don't discount this power that we have as small business for the first time. But those of us who can, back to that email concept, let your congressional representative, your senator know that it's not fair that self-employed people pay more for their health insurance than other people. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't make sense. There's a proposal. It's ready to be voted on. That can pass. And I think we do, Todd, have a real opportunity for that to pass this year. I'm not sure I ever said that any other year, but I think we have a real chance for that to become a reality.
I agree. It also includes the cafeteria plan fix as well. That would allow the owner that provides a cafeteria plan, they can't, if they could provide it for their employees, but the owner can't participate in it. So it would allow both the owner to offer and also participate in cafeteria plans, which is,
Right.
like, why? Why can't they do that? Well, they can't because of some law,
Yeah.
done by somebody a long time ago. But
And yeah, to offer the millions of self-employed people what would effectively be an immediate 15% reduction in what they pay for their health insurance. And then if we can begin to make real headway on actually lowering the cost of health care itself, suddenly you're really addressing the central issue that small companies are telling us about every day.
right.
So
There are a couple of questions.
maybe there is some real source of optimism. So let's ask some questions of the audience. So who has a question for the panel that we can begin to answer?
We got some mics
Anybody?
over there. We got Ramon. Oh, he's running to
If you
get
have a
his
question,
mic.
just raise your hand like you did in grade school, and we'll come to you.
And Simona
We have one
back
over
there
here right
has a
now.
mic as well.
Yeah, and I have a question. I mean, one question I have is that
Yeah.
let's talk about your respective organizations, nonprofits, policy influences at work. Again, remember, I'm from New Jersey, so I don't know all the fancy terms y'all use here in D.C. What can we, small business owners, what should we be doing for your organizations? Because as you said, it's small business owners coming together. But I think the business owner, we are not going to come together on our own. We're running our businesses. We rely on organizations. So can you talk for 30 seconds? Then I'd love to open the floor. What should we be doing? And maybe one of you can answer for the organizations. How can we support you? Because you are the tip of the spear advocating for small business.
Well, you should join all of our organizations, of course.
I took my credit card.
Yes, Ramon's a member of my organization, so, yeah, we took his credit card. I think, like, Ramon, for being our members to the extent that they could be ambassadors, to their peers, and at the local level, working with their other, colleagues, and just telling them about the issues, when they need to weigh in. A lot of business owners still don't know what's going on in Washington, regulations or any of the laws that are being passed until they get something from the IRS or the Department of Labor, So it's just very important for engaged business owners who are members of organizations like you or others to really be the ambassadors for these issues, educate, and the media too, as much as you can at the local level.
And me and the IRS do have a good relationship. Anybody, questions, comments? Just raise your hand. If you have, let's get some comment discussion. Let's not be shy. We're here to talk and learn from each other. Because I can ask 10 more questions in a row. Anyone else? Any of the moderators heard something that was interesting to you that you want to ask about, challenge, and ask? Any of the moderators who are coming up next? Anybody? Okay. Any maybe final? Oh, please, yeah, go ahead. And feel free to say, if you don't mind, say who you are, unless you're kind of here secretly and you don't want anybody to know who you are.
But you're on camera.
I am Charlotte. I have a small IT modernization company. I guess I want to know, so it's been on my thing, so they were sort of like, now your business is a little bit stable, it's time for you to get engaged in the political process and all that stuff. But what's the reasonable ask? If I'm going to the representative's office or the senator's office, what am I there to ask for? Is it policy? Is it Is it just airing out grievances? What's the best use of that time, and how do I engage that first step?
It's a great question.
What are you doing for small business? Start with that question.
I
And
think
say that again. Underline. That was brilliant. Say that.
What are you doing for small businesses? What's your small business agenda? And they have one. They usually have staffers that have a portfolio for each, trade or small business or environmental, et cetera. So the first thing is getting the meeting. It's a big step. And someone will be happy to talk to you about a small business agenda. And then don't be shy about joining a local association of some sort. If you're self-employed, Keith here is very smart and has great ideas. You can steal all of his or have him join you at the meeting. But I would say the first step is just getting the meeting and just starting it with a really nice open-ended question, what's your plan for small business?
Yeah.
I would also say find the Women's Business Center near you. So we have, if you're here in Washington, we have one here. We have them in Maryland and Virginia if you're local. They can help talk to you, first of all, just about on the business side, where are you seeing opportunities where your business can grow? They'll help you with that. And then they'll also work on the advocacy piece with us and perhaps with you as well. So as you grow your business, then you have an even better story to tell. And, that's that untapped resource. It's the woman-owned business, it's the minority-owned business in this country that has been this great untapped resource that will, I believe, help our country to be even more competitive globally. And so you're a critical piece to that. And so we would love, the Women Business Center, I know would love to have you as a client, and we as a network would love to have you and have your story be part of ours.
Well, and I think also the message is, and I absolutely agree, I think the message also is whether you're a women-owned business, whether you're other minority-owned business, or whether you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male old guy, that whatever. But I think the message is we as females, we as African Americans, we as Asian Americans, we're not asking for anything special. All that we're asking for is a level playing field. Small business is the most creative source in this country for problem solving. It's what small business does. So just don't fight against us. Like this health insurance thing, we're not asking for our health insurance to cost less than everyone else's. We're just asking that our health insurance cost the same. Women-owned businesses are not asking to be treated better than men-owned business. They just want to be treated the same. Has everybody seen RBG yet? Everybody seen, did I get that right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg, not on the basis of sex, but the actual documentary.
Yeah.
But she actually says in there, all we ask of our brethren is to just take your boot off our necks. And that sounds awfully dramatic for small business, and I don't want to equate small business with the issues that women have. But I think the message when you get that meeting with your congressional representative is, what are you doing for small business? And let them know our request is that we just want a level playing field.
I think just doing a little bit research too, in terms of what your pain points are as a company, right? I mean, is it healthcare costs? Is it global market access? But for example, if it's health insurance costs, right? And if there's a bill that and we could give you this information, any of our organizations can. For example, S-172, that would extend the moratorium on the health insurance tax. You go into your senator's office on that one bill, for example. I mean, a reasonable ask is, can you co-sponsor this bill? Will you vote for this bill, when it hits the floor of the Senate? And so there's a bunch of those, Small Business Tax Owners Simplification Act over on the House side. Your House member, a reasonable ask is tax simplification is important to you, and this is a bipartisan bill. Will you co-sponsor this bill? I think those are very, very reasonable asks, and sometimes a lot of members, because there's hundreds of bills, it's not on their radar screen. They may not be aware of it yet. So it's very reasonable, I think, request, can you sponsor this bill? And can you tell me that you'll support it when it hits the floor of the House or the Senate? So,
and with that, can we give a warm round of applause to our panelists and our moderator? I think it was a great job.